The federal government shutdown has closed Carlsbad Caverns, furloughed thousands of New Mexico's federal workers, while essential services continue, and both parties trade blame over stalled funding bills in Congress. The Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta is back for its 53rd year, bringing a major boost to New Mexico's tourism and small businesses, though vendors are bracing for economic uncertainty, tighter consumer spending, and fewer international visitors. Albuquerque voters are more concerned about homelessness than they were 4 years ago, and a vast majority do not think the city is doing a good job at addressing the issue, according to a new Journal poll. The New Mexico Office of Broadband Access and Expansion has launched its Community Connect grant program, offering $7 million in state funding to enhance access to public Wi-Fi. And the University of New Mexico has announced it's launching a year-long feasibility and development study to modernize the 60-year-old University Stadium. From the Albuquerque Journal, this is the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. It's Friday, October 3rd, and I'll have more on those stories in a few moments, plus a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast on the other side of this break.
This episode is sponsored by the Kirtland Partnership Committee, a proud partner in supporting Kirtland Air Force Base and its vital role in New Mexico. From growing mission sets to improving quality of life for service members and families, KPC works every day to help Kirtland's workforce thrive. It's about partnership, progress, and a strong future for national security right here in Albuquerque. Discover more at kpcabq.org.
The federal government shutdown has closed Carlsbad Caverns, furloughed thousands of New Mexico's federal workers, while essential services continue, and both parties trade blame over stalled funding bills in Congress. With more on this development, I'm now joined by the Journal's federal government reporter, Kathy Cook, who's been following this story. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Gino.
So, Kathy, with Democrats and Republicans unable to find common ground on a funding bill, we are now in the midst of a government shutdown, which has ripple effects across the country, but especially right here in New Mexico. And I was hoping you could give our listeners a little bit of an overview of who and what organizations are being affected.
A lot of the services that the general public relies on from the federal government here in New Mexico will still be open in the short term, even though there is a shutdown. You know, during shutdowns, essential services like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security checks, veterans benefits, disaster aid, those things still keep operating. You know, your mail still keeps coming. Now, for federal government employees, the picture's a lot different because many of them will be sent home from work, they'll be furloughed, or they'll be asked to come into work without getting paid.
And Kathy, when you kind of look at the figures of federal workers here in New Mexico, it's pretty staggering. More than 22,000 federal civil employees and 22,000 active duty and reserve military personnel are facing furloughs or unpaid work, as you mentioned. And nationwide, 750,000 federal workers could be affected by this.
Right, and it's hard to get firm numbers. Those numbers are firm, but each of the agencies have released nationwide plans describing, you know, here's how many workers will have to come to work without getting paid. Here's how many workers will go home. Here's how many workers will have funding from some other pot of money so they'll still get paid during the shutdown. And that's very helpful, but it's hard to get those numbers specifically for New Mexico. But we do know that many federal employees will be furloughed during this time and that even more of them will be going without paychecks during this time.
And Kathy, we've heard a lot of back and forth on this shutdown and who bears responsibility for it from both Democratic and Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, but you had a chance to talk to a few local leaders from both parties. What exactly are they saying, and is it similar to what we're hearing on a national level?
Yeah, I would say that all 5 of our congresspeople are in line with the Democratic leadership in Congress. You know, they're all saying Republicans need to negotiate with us. It's worth holding out for an extension of these federal health insurance subsidies that could, you know, if they're not extended, we could see health insurance premiums for people who are on the Affordable Care Act marketplace go up in the coming, after they expire. They're expiring at the end of this year. So people could see their health insurance premiums go up if those things aren't extended. And, you know, our representatives and senators are saying that's worth negotiating over. You know, it's interesting. New Mexico GOP chair Amy Barella released a statement today that called out Gabe Vasquez specifically for voting against the House Republican bill. Now, all 5 of our senators and House reps have voted against the House Republican bill that would be a stopgap measure for funding, but she called out Vasquez specifically, and it's notable that he's running for re-election in the most competitive congressional district in the state, so that may be part of why she pointed at him specifically voting against against this bill.
And Kathy, one part of your story that's really interesting, and I'm sure some of our listeners maybe have seen it so far, maybe some of them are hearing about it for the first time, but federal government agencies have had messages on their websites basically blaming the Democrats for this government shutdown, and that's raised some legal and trust concerns, particularly around the Hatch Act. I was hoping you could give us a little bit of information on what the Hatch Act is and why it is being brought up among these concerns.
Right. So the Hatch Act is a law that passed in the 1930s, and it prohibits federal employees in the executive branch agencies from participating in political events. And so there's this messaging on a lot of federal agency websites right now that says the radical left Democrats shut down the government, right? And we can see that message on like the website for national forests here in New Mexico. I also, when I reached out to the U.S. Agriculture Department for comment, their official comment also pointed to Democrats and said the Democrat shutdown will cause real harm to American farmers and ranchers. And so it's unusual for agencies to take that tone. And I did have a chance to speak with a UNM law professor who said that the messages are in kind of a gray zone in terms of whether or not they violate the Hatch Act. He was not comfortable saying that it's a clear-cut violation, but he did say that it's in an area where the executive branch shouldn't tread because it's creating a precedent that sort of erodes the Hatch Act.
So New Mexico and New Mexicans feeling the effect of this government shutdown, whether that be through national parks closing, workers getting furloughed or asking to work without pay, or funding shortfalls for several federal programs. Journal Federal Government reporter Kathy Cook stopping by to share the latest on this with us. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you, Gina.
The Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta is back for its 53rd year, bringing a major boost to New Mexico's tourism and small businesses, though vendors are bracing for economic uncertainty, tighter consumer spending, and fewer international visitors. With more on this, I'm now joined by Journal business reporters Natalie Robbins and Kylie Garcia. Guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So guys, as all three of us know, and I'm sure our listeners know as well, the Balloon Fiesta is one of the biggest economic drivers for New Mexico all year long, but I was hoping you could give us some numbers that really just put into perspective how big of an impact this event has.
Sure. Last year, Balloon Fiesta yielded over $206 million in economic impact. And so that's the amount that visitors spent on hotels, on rental cars, on bars, restaurants, souvenirs, transportation, parking, etc. This is also the equivalent to 1,337 full-time jobs in the Albuquerque area as well.
One of the businesses we spoke to said that just vending at this event every year, they make about a year's income. So that was pretty interesting for us to hear.
Another thing that was really interesting about your guys' story, though, was the fact that vendors and officials for the Fiesta this year are going into the event a little cautiously. And a lot of them are citing economic uncertainty, higher costs, and even declining international tourism as possible challenges for this year's Balloon Fiesta.
Tourism is down. International travel in particular is down in the United States. People are just not really visiting the U.S. from other countries as they were in years past, be it for political reasons or, financial reasons. And so there's a bit of concern. I know that Kylie and I both have spoken with some vendors who have said that their international business is really down. And also domestic tourism is kind of changing too. This year, in a year where the economy is really kind of unstable, prices for a lot of things are really high. People are Americans are preferring to stay domestic and to do road trips and things like that rather than take big plane trips.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the vendors we spoke with, Patty Lewis, owner of Discover Balloons, she said that, her booth didn't do quite as well last year. Some other vendors said that as well. She kind of credited that with it being an election year. She said that's typical for an election year. And then obviously this year we have an election year again with the mayoral race. And so just some simple factors that kind of affect that. And then restaurant industry seems to be feeling it, and they say business is down this year.
But guys, despite these concerns, there are some strong indicators that show there is still a lot of demand around Balloon Fiesta. RV and VIP ticket sales sold out quickly, hotel bookings remain strong, and more than 500 pilots from 12 countries are expected to participate in this year's event. So despite those concerns, these indicators show us that a lot of people still want to be a part of Balloon Fiesta.
Yeah, for sure. It seemed that, despite kind of like an air of uncertainty, there was also an air of optimism throughout many of the vendors and businesses and individuals we spoke with, especially, if the weather's good, they said will be good. And they're just one of the vendors said, there's so many people, more than 800,000 people, that we won't even fill it if there are a few less people while we're there. We're just going to be there enjoying the event. So the numbers after might show it, but we won't fill it in the moment.
I think it's really of note that New Mexico really doesn't get a ton of international tourism, especially compared to somewhere like New York or California. And Balloon Fiesta only gets maybe 1% of their visitors from other countries. So I think the people that we talk to aren't super concerned that the international visitors or lack thereof could really hurt business in this case.
So the 2025 Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta is set to kick off tomorrow with the opening mass ascension. Kylie, Natalie, thank you both so much for stopping by and sharing these insights with us.
Thanks, Sheena.
Thanks, Sheena.
In other headlines from the newsroom, a new Albuquerque Journal poll shows homelessness has become a top concern for city voters, with most saying officials are falling short in addressing the crisis. About 63% of likely voters rated the city's response as poor or very poor, while just 7% believe it is doing a good job or excellent job. Roughly 30% gave the city a fair rating. The dissatisfaction spans across most demographic groups, though Republicans and conservatives were more critical than Democrats and liberals. Analysts say the visibility of encampments and people gathering in areas like Central Avenue continues to drive public concern, regardless of city efforts to expand shelters and services. The findings underscore how homelessness has grown as a political issue in Albuquerque, with voter frustration likely to play a significant role in shaping upcoming city policies and elections. The New Mexico Office of Broadband Access and Expansion has launched a new Community Connect grant program that will distribute $7 million to expand public Wi-Fi access, especially in rural and underserved areas. The goal is to close the state's digital divide by funding projects that bring high-speed internet, which is 100 megabytes per second download and 20 megabytes per second upload, to communities with limited connectivity. Grants, which are capped at $2.5 million per project, require no matching funds and will be renewed on a rolling basis, with priorities being given to projects involving partnerships with local governments, tribal entities, schools, and internet providers. Funded projects are expected to be operational by June of 2026. The program is funded by the $70 million Connect New Mexico Fund, which was created by lawmakers in 2021. It builds on earlier investments, including $1.25 million awarded this summer to repair broadband in fire and flood damaged parts of Lincoln County, and an $8.6 million grant to the Pueblo of Jemez to connect nearly 700 homes and businesses. And in sports news, after a sellout crowd of 37,000 fans packed into University Stadium for the Rio Grande rivalry, UNM has announced that it's launching a year-long feasibility and development study to modernize the 60-year-old facility and revitalize South Campus into a mixed-use sports and entertainment district. The $970,000 study will be led by New Mexico firm Decker and stadium design experts Gensler, and will assess structural needs, fan experience upgrades, and long-term redevelopment options. A portion of the cost will come from $11.5 million in state capital outlay funds already in use and part of the stadium's new video board. The study will examine everything from premium seating, concessions, and restrooms to accessibility, parking, and transportation improvements. It'll also explore how the stadium can host concerts, high school championships, and statewide events. UNM leaders, including President Garnet Stokes and Athletic Director Fernando Lovo, say the goal is to create a, quote, stadium of the future that strengthens ties between the university, Albuquerque, and the state, while driving both school pride and economic development. Recommendations could be ready by early 2026, shaping the future of one of New Mexico's most important sports venues. The leading news is powered by the journalism of the Albuquerque Journal. If you enjoy hearing all of the stories we share with you here daily, please consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Journal by utilizing the discount code in our show notes. Every subscription helps support local journalism and allows us to provide you with the news that matters to you. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect sunny skies with a high near 85, and as for this evening, partly cloudy with a low around 54. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. That's the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. We'll be back on Monday.